This will probably be a bit difficult for me because I'm the kind of guy running around when having a talk and not standing this on a fixed point, but I have to because of the microphone, so please be with me. I'm Marc from Mind Revolution, and I just want to start with a quick introduction about what my work is, what I'm doing, where I'm from. You obviously realized I'm not a native English speaker. I'm trying to do my best. I'm from Germany, from Stuttgart, a lovely city in the south, and I'm working at Mind Revolution. We're a traditional communications agency and changed over time to more providing content marketing services and co-production services for clients that have in-house content editing stuff. For most of the websites, we assist our clients. We use Umbraco, at least if we produce them ourselves. And I've been using Umbraco for ages, like forever, since version 3, and it's in its infancy. If you have experience, then having to edit with Internet Explorer only. You can find me on Twitter. If you want to have a chat, just do it. I love to hear your reactions on everything. And the topic today is the grid, which is a huge topic, to be honest, because it's very much a work in progress. The grid is not a finished product. As I'd say, it's a starting point for us as a community to define its route and to see where it could go or it should go, and fill the initial idea of the grid with life. Nonetheless, it's been around for over a year now, I'd say, probably. And we need to work around some kind of problems or limitations and stuff. So for now, the first thing is approaching the grid. What does it do? What's it about? Who of you have you used the grid before? Raise your hands. In production? Okay, that's a few less. not even half of you. So I try to bring everybody on the same level and explain the grid a bit. I'm not going into too much details, but just to have a common level. Hopefully that's okay for everybody. Right now, the grid, oh, that is blurry, consists of AKA a layout, an area known as a layout. And in there, you have sections, which can be one or more per layout. So this looks blurry. This is like from the official documentation, nothing special. You have a layout and you define, you define sections in there where you can put rows. And you can have one or more rows, and there you have cells. So nothing special. And most of you know that this is essentially a CSS grid editor. So this is something I want to say in the beginning and to have you keep it in mind, because it's not a fancy widget thing. It's an editor for CSS grids. That's how it was probably born. I don't know, Antoine created it, more or less. He's not here today. I can't ask him. I never asked him. I should do it on Twitter probably. But I think that was the intention or the approach to it. It came from a technical standpoint, like where everybody have these CSS layouts. They are made in a grid today, and he was probably seeking a way to make that editable in the CMS. So we have several kind of renderers. If you edit the grid, you can use renderers to output it. It's a very simple concept, which is quite clever. And you can use a bunch of frameworks for it. So, for instance, if you love to use Bootstrap, it's built right in. But if you love to use Foundation instead, or Responsive BP, or Skeleton, or Pure CSS, there are renderers as well. You plug these renderers in, and they take the grid, which the editors use in the back office, and translate it into the final markup. So everything nice and smooth, nothing too complicated from a development perspective. But this whole process is, in my opinion, the reason why it feels quite technical. The grid is always standing there, and you just feel it's made to edit CSS. It's made to produce a markup and not to help an editor bring content to life or create content. So A small example, this is more or less the Fano starter kit, starter kit with different photo, whatever. And you see there, yeah, it's not so well. I'm sorry. There are a lot of ways to insert an image. So, as an editor, you would expect to start out with adding an image to a story you want to publish. That is my background, for instance. We're working with a lot of publishing companies. They are doing cars and magazines and stuff. They have editors. They want to publish a story. They want to bring something across. They're not starting out with layout details, but they have the vision of, this is my key visual. This is a super hot red car, and I'd like to show it to my readers. So they pick this image, and they want to insert it. But then they have to choose between an image, a wide image, a round image, a square image, a whatever image. It just gets in their way. They're like, okay, I need to make a decision on the layout, but I just wanted to add an image. So, oh, sorry. So the thing is, you need to decide on your audience. What kind of site are you building? And this is the first step to think for a good solution. Think about, for whom are you going to build the back office? What kind of site is it? What kind of editor is using it? Is it a mom and pop shop and they just want to change their weekly menu easily? You should probably go with the approach of having a CSS grid editor in the back office. It's the perfect choice. It's just the right thing to do. They go inside, they click on an image, they can easily change it, they can save it, publish, done. But if the scale is a bit bigger and you have editors producing real content, real stories, pages full with images and stuff, it's probably not the right approach to allow them to lay out everything. Because you can't see it so good or so well, but here are plus signs everywhere where you can add content. This is what happens if you start with the grid and somebody clicks only 3 times because he was trying to add content someplace and changed his mind and tried it a bit further down, and everything just stays open. It's intended to be helpful, but it's totally overwhelming. So it leads to an inconsistency because they have so much possibilities where to place an image. They have rows, they have columns, they can insert a text here and a text there and a picture below and a picture above, and there is no structure behind it. So what we realized working with clients was we needed to document how to use the grid. This was our first approach to the whole solution. This was about 6 or 10 months ago. And today I can say this is not the path you should go, because you're just adding another tag layer on it. So there's the grid itself, there's the back office, they need to log in, they need to go in there, and then they have a handbook, a documentation how to use it. Like, don't add a big image and right below a smaller one, there needs to be text in between and stuff. It's just horrible from a user standpoint. So what happens is, even if you document it, they don't follow it 100%. So you get totally inconsistent content. Sometimes things are placed on the left or on the right, depending on the mood of the editor, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but on scale, it just makes the content look bad because it's inconsistent, the look is different, things are not totally the same, and people expect that to have that kind of experience today. So the conclusion is, don't make them layout, because what happens is this. If he has a tool, especially this guy, if he has a tool, he will use it. So this is the problem with the grid. If you just provide them the opportunity to insert and to change everything and to lay out all the stuff, they will do, and they will do great harm to anything. As a German, I have to say, it will not harm the BMW, it will run flawlessly. So, the thing is, it is a great tool, but you need to set up it in the right way. You need to restrict your content editors, not making them feel restricted, but giving them a true and a clean guiding. So, it is not the Messiah we probably expected it to be, the grid, because it is a work in progress. It's much needed, and it was very welcome. For years, there was nothing like the grid in Umbraco, nothing serious. So it is welcome, but we need to solve all these content editing solutions our clients have in the right way. If we compare the grid, it's not on the same level like very polished grids, for instance, I hate to say the word, in the WordPress field. They have very polished, very slick editing, and we are not there yet. So we have to concentrate on what we can do. Also, there is no touch support, or I'd say limited touch support, probably better. If devices translate touch events in a good way to click events, it's working a bit, or bitish, but it's not really a good experience. Though we're advertising our CMS as touch ready, as you can use it on the go. I had a client call from an event, and he was totally outrageous because he couldn't move locations of things on his iPad. And he couldn't understand that I was not classifying the iPad as a computer, but he just did. And he's right, I mean, he's right, but I had to say something. I was like, yeah, it's for computers and not for, yeah, but you say it's touch enabled. Yeah, it is most of the time, but yeah, it's not with the grid. So the question for today is, how can we fix it? How can we fix what's not so good at the grid? Because it's awesome, it's great, I love it. I love using it, and I think we need it. For modern content creation, you just need a way to allow people to arrange things, to stack in on top or on bottom, to left or to right, whatever that means in a mobile world. One way is to customize the built-in editors. And there's an easy way to do it, which you can probably read that. You can do some light customization. I'd like to start with that, where you can just create a different view for an editor in the back office, but keep the controller, which is a small, simple idea. You can keep the controller, the Angular controller, if you don't want to get in touch with that in the back office, but you can add stuff to it. So in that instance, you can't see it that perfectly, but on top it's marked, it's using the standard Umbraco Property Editor Grid Media Controller. But I've added a checkbox down below. Wait a second, I can probably, no, I can't. Yeah, sorry. Just a simple checkbox. So you can let the editor check something, like mark this as a special feature, lazy load that image because it's an animated GIF, whatever, something that you need them to add to the image. Normally it would be hard work making your own controller and stuff, but this time you just change the view and use the built-in Umbraco controller. You add a bit of ng model, Angular model, you just add a property and it gets serialized back. So no, you don't have to do much work and have a customized image editor. Better yet, place that in a package manifest instead of directly to the main config. You can reuse it better. That's for more of the advanced people. And you can use a custom CS HTML for the rendering. So it's quite easy to make a custom back office editor, not only rolling a big one, but taking small steps at it and making a custom view for an existing controller in the first instance. But maybe it's more suitable to use the community tools we have. I mean, Umbraco is all about community. It's the thing that separates Umbraco from so many other systems you could potentially use as well. So let's look at what the community provides. For instance, there's the doc-type grid editor, something you really should have a look at if you're trying to use the grid in a production environment, not only for experimental stuff. So Lee and Matt did a great job. It's essentially, it's quite simple. You have the possibility to insert a doc type inside of the grid instead of only a media. So you build a normal content, is it content type now, or it stays content, okay. Because okay, so you build a content type for instance, for a slider image or stuff. It's a popular example. Oh, I don't like sliders. Where you have a few fields, you set it up, and you allow it to be used inside the grid. This way, the editors get the doc type rendered inside the grid, and if they want to edit it, it gets opened in the sidebar. It slides out, and you can fill out the fields. which is quite nice because it's also important. It separates the editing experience into the sidebar, which is a good thing if you have a lot of fields and a lot of content and a lot of logic inside there. So, because editing an image description is an easy thing if you're having it right below the image. Click on it, change it, no worries. But if you have 6 or 7 fields inside a single grid component, it makes for a crowded grid. Plus, it's hard to edit. They don't know where to click and what fields to edit. So it's good to have this doc type in the sidebar. They can fill it out. It's closing, and it's saved inside the grid. You can customize the rendering in there as well. It's quite easy. You can make an own renderer for it. How do you want to look it on the front end? How do you want to look it in the back end? You can also configure it a bit more advanced, so you don't have this dialog where the people have to click on doc type, which is not very user-friendly, but instead there is a single doc type already there, for instance, slider. This is a configuration. This is a very good way of making the user interface much better, and you can configure it. It's all documented on the project page. It's quite easy. You just add it, and they can directly select it. Very powerful. There's also Le Blender from Antoine, which is a powerful tool as well. It allows you to have an easy look at all the grid editors on the left. The rich text editor, the image, macro, embedded, whatever there is. It's getting listed nicely, so you have an overview of all the grid editors you can probably use, potentially use. Plus, you can create your own. Here's a very easy interface where you can create properties. You just click on it, say, okay, I want an image picker, I want a text field, and you can create a new, like he did here with a carousel, you can create a new editor for the grid without any code, more or less. It's a powerful thing as well. Use it with caution, because if you make too many variances of these editors, the editor pane, panel, so wait a second, also gets totally crowded. And this is helping nobody again. So you need to find the balance. How many of them do you want here? And how deep do you want to have them configured inside? So this was Le Blender, which is a very powerful tool. But then also, you could roll your own. And you should really, really, really think about rolling your own. Why? Because it's so easy. I've brought an example with me. We had these talks in our agency for forever, like, why is there no gallery component? It's just awful that there isn't one. So with all the talks about, hey, it's Angular, it's so easy, why not roll our own? And nobody had time, you know, probably it's the day-to-day business and projects, but I finally found a bit of time and tried to accomplish it, and it's quite easy to do. You see, there's a gallery component inside the grid. You have a delete symbol, and you can rearrange them by drag and drop. You can add new ones if you click on the plus sign. Very easy. You can select multiple images directly in the sidebar if the media picker opens. You can check, and they are added in the order that you clicked on them. So the question is, how long did it take? You're probably asking. If you've never rolled your own, you're probably asking, okay, how much work was it? And to be honest, I'm not that of a good developer. I try my best, but I'm more like an experienced amateur or something. And it took me about 2 hours, so I don't think that's so hard. So if I can do it in 2 hours, most of you can probably do it in half an hour. So to prove my point, this is all the code, not to read it through, but to see where the scroll bar is. There is not much to it. I used an Angular directive for drag and drop, but that's what we all should do. We shouldn't reinvent drag and drop, because there are modules for it. Just use it. Get it into the Umbraco back office, wire it up with your controller, and you have it working in no time. So to roll your own, it's so easy. You just need an editor view. It's an HTML. You put a bit of Angular in it. You need a view, a CSHTML for the output. The editor controller is the JavaScript, the package manifest to wrap everything up, and the resources, CSS, assets. It's not much. Plus, you don't always have to do all of this, like I told. You can use, for instance, just an editor view, and you want to reuse an old controller. So play around with it. Don't see the grid as a finished product, but see it as a framework for what you could do with it. Like, this is a grid, and if I had simple and clever modules, what could come out of that? And how could I write them? How could I reuse existing ones to create something with it? If you want to know the details, check the docs. The link is a bit blurry as well. Also, there are macros. Most of the long-time users probably don't have so good relations with macros. They're like, why do we have them still? But they're very useful in case for the grid. For instance, you can, if you could read it, you can make an element where we named it function, roughly translated, Funktion in German, where you can click on it and you get like kind of special features in inserting a macro. There's a standard solution to that already. We just customized it a bit. So you can allow users to pick Umbraco forms. Quite easy. They just use macro forms. They can insert it. You can extend that very well to have a list of clever things like newsletter subscription. So they can insert a newsletter subscription form, insert a contact form, whatever. You can create all kinds of macros and have them insert them. Try that. So it is an awesome, really awesome thing. The word is overused, but I mean it true to the word. It is something we needed very much for Umbraco, and I'm glad it's finally there. But then again, yeah, not so quick. Sometimes you wonder, what the hell are people doing? So this is the same with the grid. With it being a work in progress and more or less a spin-off of an original idea by Antoine and taken over by the core, and he generously donated it, it is missing a lot of things, and you have to be aware of that. I'm not trying to hold you back using the grid. I try to do the opposite. Embrace it, use it. It is the right thing to do in the right instances. I'll come to that later. But look out for the following caveats. One thing is, if you're inserting an image and using the Fanö, Okay, just speak it German, funny. Okay, if you use the Fanö starter kit and you add an image, everything works smooth. Try to change it. Remove it and upload a different image file to the same media item. You will get this. And if this happens not inside the starter kit, but in your project, like it happened to me, you're getting a bit nervous because somebody calls you and tells you, we've lost half of the images in the grid. What happened? And you're talking with the tech guys about backups and missing files until you realize somebody reworked a lot of photos and re-uploaded them with different file names. And you were so stupid, we were so stupid when we developed it, to rely on the image file name inside the JSON, which is just stupid. But the starter kit does it as well, right? And you think, hey, if the starter kit does it, it's probably the right way to do, right? Best practice or something. No, it isn't. Use the media ID, because you don't know if the image is changing. You need to understand the grid is not an active part of Umbraco. That's something that took me a bit. It's not an active node living there. It's not like we used to have our fields with typed content and stuff. It is just a blob of JSON. It's a string. And inside there is everything. And if you save the grid and publish it, it's a snapshot in time with all the images in that moment of time inserted. But if somebody changes the image later on, it's just not getting updated. There is no event. It's not reflected in there. There is the old URL in it. So that happens as well with URLs to content. That happens with pretty much anything you have in Umbraco. So be aware of that. use the ID. It's a simple solution, and if you're hitting examine, it's not that much of a cost. So you can also, for instance, check if the file exists on disk. It depends on what's better resource-wise. I tend to think an examine lookup is even faster and cached, but file systems are fast as well, sure. This whole thing talking about the grid being just a huge string of JSON brings us to the next part. It's Courier. We were so happy to have it working with Courier. Awesome. It was great. Until we hit the same problem again, and it was just a JSON. So if you transfer a document containing a grid with Courier to some other place, I don't know about Umbraco as a service, honestly. I haven't looked that much into it, but I assume it's almost the same functionality there. If you transfer it over to your testing system or to your production system, it's working flawlessly. It's transferring over the JSON blob. But probably you have 10 images in there. They will not get transferred. They'll just stay in the original system. They will not get transferred because it's just a string. It's just a string from server A to server B transmitted for the field value, period. The problem is because there are no grid editors, grid editor resolvers. In Courier, probably some of you, how many of you are using Courier in a way? Raise your hands. Okay, very special topic. I expected a lot more, honestly, so get done with that quickly. But still, it's important. You don't have grid editor resolvers. In Courier, there's the idea of resolvers. So Courier, in essence, calls a piece of code, like I'm going to transmit something. Is there anything I need to know? And you can say, yeah, you need to also fetch these 3 images and these 2 CSSs. There is no way to tell it right now because we don't have resolvers for grid editors. So it's a dead end. You just have the JSON, it's getting transmitted, and you're standing there without media. Related documents and links are not transmitted, nothing. It's just stuck there. So internal media, not YouTube videos and external stuff. It's just not transferred over. And the bad part is the JSON is using IDs and not GUIDs, which is an additional layer of problem, because now you have you can probably resolve anything from the ID if you have a single instance. But if you are on Courier, the IDs change on the target system. So there is no way of doing anything on your own. You can transfer the image, but it's not helping because the JSON would need to be changed inside. The image ID inside the JSON blob would need to be changed, and there is nobody doing it. There's no way of doing that. We did a bit of workaround for that, and it's awful. I was tempted to show it, but then again, I was not preaching bad practice. It is something I'd say I address to the core, honestly, and say this is something we need to solve together. Best way, in my opinion, would be to open it up and give us grid editor resolvers, so we can do it on our own. No worries. It's not the job of the HQ to solve our everyday problems, but we need an interface where you can act on. Next stop, examine. Oh yeah, I copied the slide. It's the JSON again. Oh man, this thing is haunting me. Again, from the examine perspective, the grid is just a huge string of JSON. It's nothing else. It's not analyzing anything in there. So if your site is relying on search, you can pretty much find data or media if you search on your website. Search for media. Almost all your pages will get listed because there is a media path somewhere in the JSON, and if the tokenizer picks it up, it thinks it's a word. It happens not all the time, but depending on the circumstances. So the problem is it's just a JSON again. So what can we do about it? Actually, it's not so easy to solve. We thought about many ways. In examine, how many of you are using examine? Oh, that's better. Everybody wants search today, right? So you just need to use examine. In examine, technically there is the possibility for a field to have multiple values. What comes to your mind is use that for it. If you find a way, tell me, because I wasn't able to. It's just not working in the way I would expect it, and we tried very hard. So we ended up using a very classic approach, going with examine events, the gathering node data, probably all of you know, and just go inside the... oh yeah. Just go inside there and analyze what's coming from the grid and look for text and look for data and see how we can build up our own mini text index and place that inside of the examine index so you can find your pages. Honestly, it's working quite well. It is, in my opinion, a very suitable approach because you can throttle what you want to get into the field and not have everything in there. But the problem is you can't do nifty things like boost on headlines. And I'd like to tell that today because I hope somebody will listen. Shannon, where's Shannon? And find a way to allow us to use the elements inside of the grid with the search. Because it would be so cool if we could boost matches that are headlines and not text. Because probably, most likely, that's the most important thing, the headline. So that's something that really needs to change, and I don't think that's possible with the community approach. But if you want to fix it for now, it's quite easy. Use the gather node data, compare the property editor name alias thing, and look for the JSON that's in there. Just read it out and act on it. You could also do a custom tokenizer for grid fields, but that's above my level. Yeah. It just didn't, it wasn't working. And I have to say that I think that's a really bad oversight. Not meant to be rude or bad, but we need, as a community, look at these things and report it more clear and more louder and more on time. It's been over a year since the grid is out there, and a few people mentioned it, but nobody really stood up and said, hey, this is bad, we need to fix it ASAP. It reminds me a bit of what happened to the not to be talked about version, where everybody was like, hey, and nobody was like, there is something not okay. For those of you who remember that. So, now on to the tips and ideas. I'd like to start with the say no to section. If you're using the grid, avoid any layoutish usage. It's causing trouble. So no sidebar plus main side-by-side thing. It's not the right concept. If you not believe me today, you will believe me in 2 years when you're attempting to relaunch. Because you have all these sidebar thingies everywhere, and you're in the rich text editor nightmare edition version 2, because it is like the markup we had back then, which we couldn't reuse because everybody was stuffing images in there and adding CSS classes and left and right and float and stuff, and you can't reuse that. You will have the same problems with this JSON blob. You can do a bit more about it because it's structured, true, but it's still not perfectly reusable. But another thing, that's mainly technical. Another very important thing I'd like to say is don't use overly complex inline editors. We had 2 fantastic talks on UX today. Very smart things said. And if we apply that to the grid, it's important to not have too complex inline editing. So clicking on an image and changing it, okay. Clicking on a text box below an image to change its description, okay. Not okay, 8 fields, 9 checkboxes, a mini table inside this blob where you can edit directly. It is a nice technical touch. I love it as well, and developers tend to do it all the time. And it is so cool and so smart, sure, but the editors get totally overwhelmed, especially since the grid isn't visually easily separating all the elements, so they often don't see where things are. Is this a checkbox from below or from above? So I highly advise don't use overly complex inline editors, resort to the sidebar. Open the sidebar, allow the editing there if you roll your own. Use doc type grid editor to open the sidebar and allow the users to insert the information there. It's much cleaner, and they close it afterwards, and they know they've done it. Oh. Yeah, next thing. don't rely on section. Don't rely on any internal URLs, media, or whatever. Grab the ID and work with that. That's the experience we had. It was a really bad thing when they called me, and I remember it like it was yesterday, because I thought there was something wrong with the environment, with the server, files gone or something, and I totally went into the wrong route and directed it to the tech guys until we realized it was the process of content editing that ruined everything. So watch out and use the ID. Also, 2 generic editors instead of tailored ones. What I mean by that is if you just provide text, headline, and image, it's too restrictive, because you don't get the subtle differences. Is it a headline or is it a subline, it's a byline or whatever? Provide them with the option to change that on a headline level. So don't create 2 generic editors where everything is in there cramped and you can configure it with the cook wheel and opening it up and stuff. But think about how many editing controls are suitable for the job, like 6 or 8 or 9, and how can we combine the functionality we require layout-wise into approximately that amount of controls, and then see what you come up with. Probably that's the best way, I think, how to approach it, and see if you can rebuild all the structure and all the things, all the layouts you want with these 8 or 9 things. And then look at them. How many options do they have? 9 checkboxes? Yeah, a bit too much. Split them up in 2. So really think about a grid. Don't think the grid is a solution you plug in and you have something. You need to see it as, oh man, I hate it, I need to say it. It's like a mini CMS inside the CMS. You really need to think about the structure you're doing. It's also kind of a problem that it is a mini CMS inside the CMS, but you should realize by that it's difficult with the standard set. You need to customize it, so think about it. Take your time, look into it, and test it. Also, nested content. This is in big letters, because every time you're thinking about using the grid, think about using nested content, the package, instead. Think twice about using it instead. And if you're absolutely sure it's impossible to use nested content in that situation, then it's okay to use the grid. This is something we learned the hard way, because we had the grid in places where it's just not the right thing. It's just, probably it's better to have editors insert the thing in nested content. For those of you not so familiar with nested content, it's a very cool extension by Lee, where you can add repeated content over and over inside a list, which is layouted according to a doc type. You can configure it extensively. Have a look at it. The grid is not the answer to everything. Nested content is often the better solution. And for those of you using archetype, please don't do anymore. Sorry, Kevin. Yeah. You can easily insert doc types and have them repeat. The next thing is to think outside the box. Think outside the box. The grid can do so much more than just CSS grid editing, because you could use it for content blocks and not entire pages, which is the main approach I recommend. Use it for instance, for the main content body or something, and not for all the by content. But you can also reuse it for a widgets column or stuff. That's where it really shines, where you can put the grid to different uses. For instance, I'm sorry, this was intended to show the maximum amount of row types you should probably allow. This is quite a few, and I would say more than a line on the resolution you expect for your editors is just too much. They can't handle that. If you have too many row layouts, it will totally overwhelm them. On the other hand, we need a way to change the row layout type, please. Because right now you have to delete all the complete row and edit it as a different type to have different content editors allowed below, for instance, to show up. So, yeah. And think about mapping the CSS kind of grid your own way. You don't need to use the grid rendering, the built-in or the external ones available. You can just use the JSON that the grid is and build your completely own render logic. For instance, a simple case we often use is, on the doc type, there is a key visual the editor can select outside of the grid. It's not a mandatory field. Why? Because editors hate mandatory fields. They are always red, and no computer user likes red colors. So we didn't want to make it a mandatory. Why? Because often people just add the key visual as the first grid item. And we realized they think because it's on top of the page, they add it as a really big image as the first row, as the first column, and this is the header image, kind of. They should have selected it in a field, sure, but we're not trying to force that on them. Instead, if the field is empty, the Umbraco field for the key visual is empty, and the first item in the grid is an image, we just pull that up in the layout into the header, and we're not talking about it. It just happens. And the same you can do, for instance, with the first headline. Make it very big and bold automatically. Think about ways how to make more out of the grid than the standard loop it is right now. Right now, it's just a loop over all the calls, more or less, on the rows and stuff. But if you look at it more in depth, you could find ways to make the content layout more intelligent, especially if we're talking about responsive designs in mobile. Because there, it's just not helping to tell users, not everybody's sitting in front of the desktop. If they are sitting in front of a desktop layouting the thing. I wanted to use another word, but not here. When they're layouting the thing, they're sitting in front of a desktop, huge resolution, 4 or 5K probably. They have all the space, and then they're sitting there. Okay, yeah, 6 columns. So how do you map that to mobile? You can do with requiring them to add classes and stuff. It's horrible. You need to have some kind of automagic working all that. And so this is the point where you need to think, if we're making a big, good project, a really nice thing with all the bells and whistles, probably we should do our own renderer and really think about how can we realign content, when to stack, when to flow. And what we experience is the best thing is provide the editors only with a maximum of 2 columns, and the rest is decided by the layout engine. If, for instance, we are having 4 columns, 2 each, and we're, oh, sorry, I need to explain it differently. If we have 2 columns, and again 2 columns below, we can pull the second 2 columns up and make them 4 on desktop, for instance. And this is something, in my experience, that you should decide in your renderer and not having the editor decide, because devices change, usage changes, and the editors should just insert the content and have their storyline layout. So use it with limited editors, just for data and positioning. Don't allow too many editors. And for instance, if you want to have a gallery and you want to give users a control over an image gallery inside of, for instance, a product document type, which has no content grid editor of other sorts, you can use the grid, for instance, for the gallery layout, just for the gallery. So you allow only images in there, and you allow them different row layouts, so they can make more fancy galleries, like big image and smaller image and 4 below, so they can neatly arrange it and make it look perfect. So this is a small little idea, helps a lot. Gallery layouts, sorry. So last thing, test packages. If you use packages with media and stuff that act on media and you want to use it with the grid, you really need to test it, because there's a smart package. I can't remember its name. We had a discussion on Twitter recently. It was some Scandinavian guy, I think. He made a package that is called Media, help me, I want to write it down. Media content usage. Essentially, it uses Examine, I think, to analyze where a media file is used in what content node. So you can see it on an other device beaming it, the image, you could see that it's listing all the content nodes below the image where this image is used, which is very helpful for the editors regarding the media editors. So, but this doesn't work with the grid. And if you're just plugging it in and not testing it, you're probably under the impression that it's working. And you say, oh, if there's no node listed, you can delete it. No worries. You can delete images. That happened to me. So bad. But still, I want to conclude with the grid. Still, it's awesome. It's really, in the true meaning of the word, it's a fabulous tool if you use it right. And the last thing I want to ask is, what can you share? So, any questions or any experiences with the grid you like to share? How many minutes do we have? 2? 2 people. Come on, 2 people. Aww. So, any questions? Yes, please.
Yeah, first I want to say this is one of the presentations I really enjoyed.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, because you come here from the actual user experience of implementing Umbraco, and that's pretty valuable. So one thing that came up last year on your presentation,
Yeah. Yeah. I think the grid has improved. It's the little things. For instance, the scrolling, the handling of the scrolling was much improved. And I also, when I received that correctly, Rune is starting to act on the grid now. It's a project that everybody knows it's an important piece, but as with all systems, all the pieces are important. So I think the grid will get more TLC the next few months, but we need to see what we as a community can do to change it. I think we need more community-driven efforts like grid editors. There are just too few of them. I think probably everybody's reinventing a gallery. It's just bad. On the other hand, maybe the HQ could help us with a simple filter on the site, because right now you can't see if something is a property editor or a grid editor. It's horrible. Also, we could approach people doing property editors about doing a grid editor version of it, because it's very easy to change it. On the other hand, you have 2 code bases, then yeah, well, it's easy the first time, copy it over, change it, but then, yeah. Okay, so I think the grid is here to stay. Plus, Shannon told me there is coming in 7.4. 7.4, we have Examine support for the grid built in. He doesn't have a clue right now how to do it. But if you know this smart guy, he will figure out. So the grid is here to stay, and I think it's evolving day by day. Anybody else? One more? Okay. So whatever you want to talk about regarding the grid, just hit me up on Twitter or have a talk down the hall, wherever. Thank you very much.